to invite Dr. Kozovsky up with his team and get settled. You guys can sit at the table over here or use the podium and decide how you want to present. Because we have some new board members, I'll go just a little bit of a history. We've been doing school spotlights the entire year. Usually we have 2 buildings at once, but tonight we have 1 building, International Prep Academy. Their task was to provide you information that is connected to their school improvement plan, that is connected to their work with the school improvement leadership team, which you'll meet here in a second, and that is connected to, which also connects their focus schools work and all of the really connection with all the district initiatives getting down to the building level and being carried out. There are a lot of people that help them in the work, but this is the team at the building that makes it happen. And we're just going to let them get kind of settled. In the June meeting, I will be bringing forward all the school improvement plans. You're getting a summary of some of those now. They'll be on a consent for a vote. But just remember when you kind of see those, this is what they're going over when they do. Okay? So, Dr. Howard, IPA, are you ready to go? All right, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good evening, Dr. Boozer and the board. We're super excited to be here tonight to share all the fantastic things that have been happening at IPA this year and also provide you a little bit of a dual language update on where we've been and where we're going. But before we get into all of that, we're going to introduce our team. So I'm Dr. Jonathan Kozovsky. I'm the principal at IPA. And we can start down there and do some introductions.
I'm Anna Melendez, the only school social worker at IPA for 8 years now.
Good evening. I'm Abby Amrosky, the Dean of Students.
Stephanie Kenny, Assistant Principal.
I'm Jessica Morawski, the Instructional Coach and the Co-Chair for the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee.
Angela Kleber, Kindergarten Teacher and Interventionist and Co-Chair with Jess for TNL.
Kim Tate, 5th grade dual language teacher, as well as Equity Co-Chair for our Silk Committee.
I'm Jackie Hoke. I teach kindergarten, and I get to co-chair with Kim for the Equity Committee.
Excellent. So that is our school improvement leadership team. And let's see if I can make it work. There we go. All right. So we're going to take you on a little bit of a journey. And our journey starts with kind of where we're at with our demographics and our student population at IPA. I'm finishing my 8th year as principal at IPA, and when I started there, I was actually taking over for a program that had an enrollment of 90 students. So 8 years ago, we had 90 students in a program, and currently, today, we are finishing the year with 573 students in a full K-8 building. And then as you look for our 2024 projected total after we bring in and promote some 8th graders this year and bring in a fresh group of kindergartners next year and also some pre-K students, we're looking at a projected total of about 669 students at IPA. So we're really growing and expanding quite quickly. It's been quite the journey. One important thing with our demographics is really who are our students, right? What is our student population? And I think that's sometimes not as well known for IPA is who we really serve. So when you look at our student population, you can see the majority of our students are Hispanic and Latinx, 66.7%. And then we pretty much have a close to equal distribution between our white students at about 16% and our Black and African American students at 12%. But definitely that Hispanic and Latinx population is what leads our student enrollment, and that's why we're a dual language program. So speaking of dual language, we really haven't had an opportunity to speak to the board in a number of years of kind of like what dual language is all about, right? And why do we do it, and what does it entail? So here for you, we have a little bit of a graphic. These are the pillars of dual language. We didn't invent it. It's actually from the Center of Applied Linguistics, which is a national organization that defines dual language education. And there's 3 top priorities in dual language education. One is going to be bilingualism and biliteracy. So we want to make sure that all of our students are multilingual, right? It's not just something to go through our program and come out only speaking English. We need to ensure that all of our students have the ability to grow in their bilingualism and actually their multilingualism and be able to be fluent and literate in both Spanish and English. The next piece is high academic grade level achievement for all of our students. So it's not to say that our students aren't going to achieve on grade level by the end of our program. That's a must. That's a non-negotiable. And we also emphasize and promote sociocultural competence, and that's where you're getting into your social justice pieces, your understanding how different groups of students integrate and work together, and that's all talking about our cultural lens that we use at IPA. And down at the bottom, you can see our two languages that we're really working to bridge together. We're working to bridge English and Spanish together, and that's actually one of the instructional models for dual language education is this idea of bridging. It's not just about teaching English in separation from Spanish, but really finding ways to bring these two languages together because they have a lot of similarities, although they do have some differences as well. I'm going to pass this over to our teaching and learning crew as they talk about our instructional excellence and our targeted learning focus.
So as co-chairs of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee of our SILT team, Angela and I had the opportunity to attend Focus Schools Professional Development along with Dr. Kosofsky. And a lot of the work that we did with Focus Schools was really honing in on one thing that we want all students to know and be able to do as a part of their education with us at IPA. And so we were able to model some work with our entire staff that we had first participated in at the Focus Schools professional development sessions. We took a look at our current data, our student enrollment, some of our assessment data, and we tried to narrow down what are some of the things that our students are currently facing as far as challenges, what are some successes that we are already having, and how can we wrap that up into a nice, neat little package. And so thanks to the participation of all of our staff, we were able to narrow down our focus to multilingual comprehension. And so this is something that all of our students are focusing on, all of our staff, teachers, interventionists, coaches, everyone as a part of IPA is really focusing on. So we were able to come together as a staff to decide on that, and then our next step beyond that was to find some sort of snappy student slogan to get all the kids involved as well. So the teachers, again, were able to brainstorm and bring out their creative sides to come up with something that the students could also be a part of. We came up with 3 options for the students to vote on, and all of our students, kindergarten through 8th grade, voted, and we came up with the slogan, Panteras Empoderadas para el Mundo, which translates to Panthers Empowered for the World. And so that will actually be revealed to our students in a video tomorrow morning, so we're very excited for that.
So after we had our targeted learning focus, we needed to consider some evidence-based practices that were going to get us to meet that goal. So again, we got together as a staff during a staff meeting in small groups, and each small group looked at some of the work of John Hattie and his effect sizes, and found some instructional practices that might help us get to this comprehension goal. So after that, the work that the staff did during the staff meeting went to the K-8 committee. The K-8 committee is comprised of our SILT chairs, our curriculum chairs, and our 6-8 CACs. And together we sorted all of the work that the teachers did into sort of categories. And we put similar things together, and then we came up with the 3 that you see on the slide: classroom discussion, teacher clarity, and transfer strategies. According to the work of John Hattie, an effect size of 0.4 equates to a year's growth in a year's time. So when we were looking at the things that we wanted to use, we wanted to make sure our effect size was higher than a 0.4 so that we could make accelerated growth. So as you can see from the slide, all of our practices that we selected are above a 0.8, which means 2 years growth in 1 year's time. And then just to give you an idea of what each of those things are, classroom discussion, obviously, is making sure that all children participate in the classroom discussion and developing a repertoire of highly effective protocols for classroom discussion. Teacher clarity has to do with making sure that the kids understand with every lesson, every day, what is the target, why we're learning it, and how you will know that you have learned it. So that goes along with some success criteria, knowing how they're going to know when they have achieved that goal. And then the last one, transfer strategies, is important for all students, especially for ours, and that's the ability to use a skill that you have learned in a new and unique learning situation, and that for us, that also means in another language.
Excellent. So as we look at kind of where we're going at IPA, we can also talk about where we've been. So this is a little bit of our data from this previous IAR data set. So this would be the 2022 IAR data. And one thing that's been really strong at IPA over all of the years has been the fact that our growth data has been much higher than the state average and also, much higher than the district average, which is showing us that we're taking our students and we're starting at a point A and we're growing them to point B, point C, point D, right? So it's important to know that growth is not attainment, but it is showing how much our kids are growing over time in comparison to their peers in the district and in the state. And we're really proud of that data. Then when you look at attainment, it's a similar conversation where we look at attainment at IPA, both for math and ELA in comparison to district and state. And you can see that we're maybe a tad bit higher than the district average, but we also trend a little bit further down from the state. And that's just honest data, right? And when we also look at the school, district, and state data, I don't think anybody in the room is super proud of where everybody's at as a state. To say that 25.5% of our students are meeting expectations in math in the state, it's not acceptable, right? So we're in that fight together with everybody to grow our attainment data and to get our kids not only to grow over time, but actually to meet the benchmark of that grade level achievement that we talked about before. So in order to make those goals, we need to talk about a little bit what our data and accountability and programming looks like at IPA. So it's important to see here, you have two graphics. We're going to start with the graphic on the right, actually, which is a little complex and different. But you see multiple program models under the lens of transitional bilingual education and also ESL education. And what you can see in those trajectory lines are the outcomes that you would see if you implemented that program in a building to see what kind of output and achievement you would get from students. And as you can see, when you're working in the world of pull-out ESL, you're going to see the lowest amount of achievement because that truly is English-only acquisition. You're doing it in a pull-out model, and you're also ensuring that there really is no native language exposure for that student. Sometimes you have to use pull-out ESL as your model, but when you have more than 20 students in one grade center or one building, we have other options, right? So IPA is a dual language model that falls under transitional bilingual education. And if you go up a couple lines there, you're going to see early exit transitional bilingual education, which means we're working really hard and fast to move kids to English only. So on that program model, it would be saying we're going to honor their first language and grow their capacity for about 3 years in that language and then shift them to English. And you see what those outcomes look like in that light blue. Then, following that, you see a late exit transitional bilingual education. Instead of like a 3-year approach, that's more of a 5 to 6 year approach. You see what those outcomes look like. Then you can see what happens when we create a one-way dual language program, which means that in that classroom, it would be only native speakers of the target language that you're working with. So at IPA, we constitute all of our classrooms with 50% native English speakers, 50% Latinx students or Spanish speakers, and that is what we call a two-way program. The one way would be only taking Latinx students or Spanish speakers and putting them into a classroom and saying, we're going to do dual language just with this population. You can see what those results look like. Higher than late exit TBE or transitional bilingual education, but not quite as high as a two-way program. So that is why we as a district are implementing and continuing to implement a two-way dual language program, because that top line, that dark blue line, is the program model that we have. And that's also the program model that yields the best results and something that we're growing and hoping to aspire to with our data. Then what you can see over to the left-hand side is what a program model that uses a 90-10 dual language approach, the growth that they'd see over years. And as you can see there is exponential growth that happens in student achievement in dual language programming. The reason why it's exponential is that our students are navigating some language pieces when they're younger. They're getting used to language. They're getting used to either being immersed in English, being immersed in Spanish. It's not that those practices are bad for students, but it requires them to grow and expand and adjust to that learning setting. And then as you move that trajectory along, as you get to 8th grade, the growth that you see grows exponentially there, and you can also see that in some of our MAP data that reflects that as well. So our younger grades don't see that growth, but then as you hit that 6-8 data, you're seeing that more exponential growth in comparison to peers. So that's a little bit about ESL, TBE programming, and then also dual language growth over time versus monolingual education. So speaking about more accountability pieces, our data from fall to spring, we just got that data and we were actually really pleased with some of the things that we were seeing on that data. Some celebrations. We actually had higher MAP growth for ELA and math in 6-8 in comparison to the district. So we were super proud of that. We were really excited to see what those results were. And I'll be honest, when we did fall to winter MAP, we were a little concerned. I, as the principal, was a little concerned, right? I was sitting there and thinking to myself, what's going on? What's happening here? And then to hold fast, stay true to it, and see where we got by the end of the year, we saw that difference really come in. And we were really pleased with not only the growth, but then also the attainment that we're seeing at IPA. So that's where you start seeing that difference between in IAR, growth and attainment. We see the same thing in MAP now, where our growth is improving and also our attainment is improving. And then our Hispanic students demonstrated a strong performance on ELA and math in grades 2 through 8. So we were very proud of that as well. With celebrations, still comes growth areas. So we're looking in our growth and our analysis of things in a 90-10 program to be more appropriate, or to have a more appropriate measurement for K-1 students. MAP is great, but it's not necessarily a dual language assessment. So we want to see something that's going to give us the valid and reliable data that we're looking for to truly measure those students and give them an equitable and really valid and reliable assessment practice that allows us to respond to the data to show where they're at and what we need to refine in our practices. We also need to increase our focus on all student populations across the building. It's clear that we have a large population of Latinx and Hispanic students. They're starting to see success in our efforts and our approaches, but we also need to hone in on our Black and African American students and our white students to see what their attainment and growth is going to look like as well. And then another piece that we've analyzed as a building is improving our consistency in growth and achievement among all grade levels in 2 through 8. So we can see pockets where it's not as high as we want it to be, and that's some intentional work that we need to do around that to raise that up. So speaking of dual language programming, as I'm sure the board and district leadership know, we are currently utilizing a 50-50 language allocation at IPA. And when you look at a 50-50 language allocation, what that means is that we are teaching English and Spanish literacy simultaneously. So when a kindergartner enters IPA currently, they are being immersed in English literacy and Spanish literacy and expected to keep all those things together, but separate. So that's a really tricky reality. And within that reality, students must learn to decode 2 languages at the same time. As I know the board is aware, we've had a large effort this year on picking the right ELA curriculum for our K-5 programming. And that was a really intense decision that required a lot of purposeful analysis and figuring what was going to work best, because decoding is a thing. Comprehension is a thing. So when you decode and start comprehending in 2 languages, languages that might have similar rules and separate rules, that becomes very complex for students. And then currently minutes are equally divided between English and Spanish instruction in K-5. We do that by content areas. They have reading and writing in English and in Spanish every day. We teach math in English. We do social studies and science in Spanish. And at the end of the day with our minutes right now, it's 50% English, 50% Spanish. And then research is really telling us that total Spanish language acquisition is a little bit weaker in a 50-50 program. So although our 8th graders that are finishing right now that are being promoted have had great strides in their English and Spanish language acquisition, it's not where we want it to be. And part of that reason is the current program model that we're utilizing. We're not giving them a strong enough foundation in Spanish to start with, and English is tending to dominate things. And when you look at a 50-50 language allocation, it's important to know that it's not recommended for what they call transparent languages. Transparent languages are languages that look the same and act the same. Spanish and English are transparent languages. So currently, our program model doesn't match the languages that we're utilizing it for. So then you have a 90-10 language allocation, which is a little bit different. Instead of simultaneous literacy, it's sequential literacy, which means that students are going to be immersed in a target language first and taught to read and write in that language, then you're going to follow with English. So that's the true crux of a 90-10. You're also going to spend 90% of your day in the target language, which for us is Spanish, and 10% in English. All content area begins in Spanish. You start growing that English content area, those English content instruction as you move along. Our kids would then learn to decode in one language versus having to learn how to decode at 5 in 2 languages, which is very complex. You see stronger language acquisition both in Spanish and in English in a 90-10 program according to research, and it is recommended for transparent languages. So with that in mind and that analysis of 50-50 models and 90-10 models, excuse me, I'm kind of ahead of myself. I was going to give you an example of what some of this decoding looks like. So if you're familiar with Spanish at all, Spanish and English share the same vowels. So the vowels that are on the screen are the vowels in English and the vowels in Spanish. But this is where it gets tricky. An A in English is the first letter that is up there. It sounds like A in English, and it sounds like A in English. An A, the letter name A, in Spanish is actually the letter E that is up there. The letter E in English is the second letter, but the letter E in Spanish is the third letter. Right? So if you're confused right now, so are our 5-year-olds. So the program model is lending itself to a little bit of confusion because of the vowel mixing that you have to do in kindergarten. And as we've worked with different consultants, different research models, you can see that this is truly the crux of what might be delaying our students' ability to effectively decode and comprehend. So now that we know that this is an issue, it's our job to work to fix it and come up with an alternative solution to it. So shifting to a 90-10 will fix some of these issues. Because what happens is when we teach kids to read and write in Spanish in kindergarten, we don't touch the English vowels. We save those into about halfway through first grade. Then we start layering those things in. So it's really important to know that a 90-10 model is actually an appropriate model to help stop confusing our students and start getting some of that attainment and growth that we want to see. So as we talked about kind of this shift in programming and where we're at with things, a 90-10 model is truly the research-based model. However, what we know is that implementation sometimes looks a little bit different. So even though you call it a 90-10, when you divide out your minutes in the day, it's not really a 90-10. It's more so an 80-20, and I can explain to you why it's an 80-20. You have to have an English language development block in your day. So in a 90-10 program, that 10% in English was just supposed to be English instruction on literacy or on oracy. We teach specials in English. Those count as minutes. So next year, we have a 45-minute special rotation that we're implementing in the K-5 world. So those 45 minutes plus another 25 minutes of English oracy really gets you to an 80-20 model. So we call it a 90-10, but implementation is really an 80-20. When you look at timing over the years, you can see how language shifts. You go from an 80-20 to a 70-30 to a 60-40. By the time they hit 4th and 5th grade, that's where you're experiencing a 50-50. And then we're going to be honest about the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade reality. There are 2 courses that we offer in Spanish. They are both content-based courses. They are not electives. They take Spanish language arts, and they take social studies in Spanish. According to dual language research, as long as you offer 1 content area class and 1 elective, you have a true dual language middle school program. We're going a little bit above and beyond that because we're offering 2 core classes, but not an elective, and that's okay. But that's why you see more of a 30% Spanish, 70% English in your grades 6, 7, and 8 there. So what we are thinking and what we're moving to for next year is this program model versus a 50-50 straight across. And that's kind of the rationale as to why we would make that shift and decision. So with shifting and deciding, we have a little bit of a rollout of where we're going with this 90-10 implementation. And as you can see, in summer 2023, the work's already started. We're working on a literacy decision for next year. We've been reviewing some options. So our staff is going to work to come up with a pilot of ELA and SLA curriculum for next year for K-5. Meanwhile, our 6-8 ELA and SLA team is going to start using Amplify. They're going to use Amplify in English to help ground their work there and build that model to help support Spanish. They really offer a nice ELA package where they have some sound instructional practices, and our job now is to marry that into Spanish, and that's what we're working on. And then we're also focusing on summer writing to help develop all of this curriculum and make it aligned to dual language. When you look at next year, that's really our first year of 90-10 implementation that we're looking to shift things, and that's going to be our kindergarten team. They're going to work in a 90-10 world. The rest of the building will stay a 50-50. Then the following year, kindergarten stays 90-10. We're going to roll up an 80-20 or 80-20 and 70-30. Then the following year, we get second grade on board. And while we're doing all of that, the goal is to redevelop our 3rd through 5th grade classrooms to realign them into a more effective 50-50. So when you look at this, our goal is to start with a new dual language program model for next year, roll it out over 3 years to help improve the attainment and growth that we are seeing at IPA. So that's a little like dual language overview. But now we're going to go back to some of the equity work that's happening at IPA.
We love equity at IPA, and we just wanted to share a couple of the highlights from our committee. Our work has been anchored in the work of Dr. Goldie Muhammad and her Cultivating Genius framework. We worked with this framework for about our 3rd year. And so we like to anchor all of our work in essential questions connecting to AVID. And so one of our first essential questions when we brought this work to the building was, how are we cultivating genius in our students? And so I'm going to let my wonderful co-chair talk a little bit about this work that we did.
Sure. So it was really Kim who was the one that came to me like 3 years ago when we started this, and she sent me a YouTube video and was like, hey, listen to this author. It's awesome. And so that's how we got started. So Kim's a genius. We all know that, though. All genius, yes. So the work that we're doing with this framework, it's actually, her framework is for culturally and historically responsive education. It's a literacy framework that gives tons of opportunities to incorporate all content areas. Kind of the 5, what she calls learning pursuits, are identity, skills, intellect, criticality, and joy. So those are the things that we're really focusing our work on in our equity committee. Something that brought about this year, a highlight, was focusing on asset-based instruction with the teachers in our committee. Our essential question that drove that work was, how are we ensuring that we see our students through an asset-based lens? Especially in dual language, it's really important to have authentic assessments so that you're really getting a full picture of what your students are able to do within content and also in language. And so we did some work just on analyzing assessments, determining if they're asset-based and inclusive in both content and language, and just looking at how we can make the changes where they're needed so that we're always analyzing student work through that asset-based lens so that we can use that data to plan. And we talked a lot about using student input also in terms of creating next steps for our learners. And just one quote that we really focused in on was from, she's a teacher, an administrator, and also an author, and we got to see her at a professional development, was Dr. Angela Searcy. And she said, when we find inequities in our data, if we're not changing them, we're choosing them. And so that was something that really anchored our work this year too.
And then finally, another thing we considered within our equity committee was language. Language is powerful. Words have power. And so we want to make sure that the language that we are using with our students uplifts, edifies, and encourages them at all times. And so some of the questions that anchored our work on language included: what language conveys belonging? What language conveys love? And the discussion around that was so rich. We even asked, what's our students' love language, right? What's the language that they connect with? What language conveys excellence? How are we speaking excellence to our students? How are we conveying that we have high expectations and that they can meet them and we're there to support them? And what language conveys genius? And so we talked about some things, shifting from rules and regulations to rights and responsibilities, right? Because we're part of a community. And so when you feel like you're part of a community, you're all in. And so those were the big highlights, I think, from our work this year.
All right, so I kind of had the icing on the cake this year and got to really dive deep into Avid, and we've done some awesome things. The biggest thing we've seen as we've done walkthroughs is that we already are doing so many things throughout K-8. We just have to put some things informal for our site plan. And it started off with a site team the very first year at IPA, and we had over 20 people who were on our site team doing some major things. Our rollout kind of consisted in just 5th grade this year. We started with organizational and trying to really hone in on what they're doing and then using that as our base to spread out through our whole campuses. We are going to be intentional about this work, so we've included it in our school improvement, and it is going to be really awesome with what our site team has put in place. We are really diving into the relational capacity stuff. We've aligned it with our SEL components and how that's going to look, and we know that it has to be from the teachers as well as the students. And I'm excited to be taking 6 of our staff members to Summer Institute this summer to do some work for our plan and add to our team of trained professionals.
So an amazing part of IPA is that we all see the importance of family engagement and how that contributes to student learning, a welcoming environment, and also diversity within our spaces. So on this slide, I'm sharing a couple of highlight events that we've had, not just culture and climate. We started the year with Hispanic Heritage Celebration. That is tradition for IPA. It was disrupted for 2 years because of COVID. So we had to bring it back and we had to do it right. I can speak on that and say as a Latina, this is important, but we saw the data with 66% of our population Hispanic. This is also important for our school culture and community. Then we had the ribbon cutting in November. We had some community members. In February, for Black History Month, we also had another committee initiated by parents every single year. We had scavenger hunt during the day. We had music. We had lots of student talent. And then we were so motivated by the turnout from Hispanic Heritage Celebration that we did an evening event called Soul Night. So we were also able to present that to the community in the evening. Next is Dia del Niño. That's a PTA celebration that they do every single year. Again, another opportunity for the families to come, do arts, music, treats. We did face painting, inflatables, so that's another opportunity for our families to come into our space. Right under that is our most recent event, the Family Literacy Night. It was hosted by Champaign Public Library, and it was initiated by one of our culture and climate members. They hosted us, they had games, rewards, we did a scavenger hunt around the library, and if families didn't have a library card. That was an opportunity for them to receive a library card. There was also a community organization with resources for the families. It's up there, and she deserves it, so I'm going to say it again. Kim Tate, our Golden Apple winner. We got to celebrate as a whole school, K through 8, and it was so fun. It was so exciting to be able to do that. The last thing I wanted to just talk about is just culture and climate. We are aware, again, that it takes a lot of part to make IPA a safe and welcoming environment. So we were focusing on 4 things in 4 subcommittees. We had Tier 1 with the skills and expectations. We had teacher self-care. We had middle school integration, because we are 2 buildings, but we don't want it to feel like 2 buildings, and family engagement. We kept coming back to family engagement as our key thing for IPA, so next year it will be its own SILT committee.
I've had the pleasure of helping IPA bring athletics and extracurriculars into their campus for the first time this year, and we are super excited about some of the results that we had from that. We had girls and boys cross-country just at IPA. We had 24 students for cross-country from 5th grade to 8th grade, so that was very exciting. We had girls and boys basketball. We only had 1 team for girls and 1 team for boys, but we did have 14 girls and 15 boys on those teams. It was not a winning season, but we just got started, so it's all right. We're just learning, and we're super excited. We're going to have 2 teams for girls and 2 teams for boys next school year. We're integrating 5th graders now, and we just have a lot of interest, so that's been really fun to watch grow. Archery was something new. We weren't sure we were going to do it. We didn't have a coach at first. Got a coach. And they actually got to participate with Centennial and Jefferson, and got to really have a fun time with that this year. Science Olympiad kind of just popped out of nowhere for IPA this year. We got 3rd at regionals. They went to state. We had 4 students that got state championships out of 43 total middle school students participating in Science Olympiad. So that was really fun to celebrate for IPA. We were going to have a Scholastic Bowl team this year, but that did not pan out. So we're going to try Scholastic Bowl again next year. We already have a coach for that. So we're really super excited to see how that looks. Activity-wise, you can see we really dove right in this year and just kind of started all kinds of stuff. Any kid who had an idea kind of came to the table, and we ran with it. So it's worked out really well. Yearbook was phenomenal. Soccer blew up. We had almost 50 kids that wanted to do soccer clubs, so we kind of had to cut that down a little bit. But they actually got to play a game against IFC at Franklin, and we won 5-3, so that was fun. The book club was fun to see, have something different for kids that didn't want the athletic side to participate in. Student Council had their one and only dance this year, and that turned out really well for Student Council. We have a lot of growth continuing to go in our athletics and extracurriculars. It's really fun to watch IPA grow.
So hopefully you get a little bit of a picture of everything that's been going on at IPA. There's it's a busy place. So lots of good things happening, and even some instructional programming that we're looking to shift for the betterment of our kids, so that we see better outcomes for them, because that's our mission. That's what we're here to do. And we always want to see better data, and we want to see better realities for our kids. So we want to thank you for your time this evening and the opportunity to come and just share with you all. So thank you.
This is just a report, but my fellow board members, does anyone have questions for the team? Please go ahead, Mr. Teese.
Yep. You're at 573, you're 669 for next year. What's your capacity?
It's It's a very good question. So our capacity currently in the brand new building is 4 strands at 24 students per strand. And of course, I don't have that number for you right now, but that's the capacity within that building. And then in the actual 6-8 building, we had forecasted a total of about 225 students for that space. Could probably go up to about 250 if needed with class sizes and pieces like that.
I want to add that we also have a committee that's working to find out all the capacity of all of our buildings. So some of the information that we present to you this evening may not be totally accurate. So we'll get that information back once the committee is finished. And Mr. Henry Walker and his team, along with Ms. Matkowski, are helping to lead that work. So we want to know what the capacity is of all of our buildings across our system. So when we finish that, you'll know for sure, and you'll be able to, spew it any and every time.
Sounds great.
Okay?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Ms. Vasquez.
Thank you so much. I just want to speak to the culture and climate commentary. We were a host family for one of your teachers before they joined you, and it was really lovely to see Marta just kind of walk into your building and all the things that I didn't know how to answer, and my husband and I were doing our level best to try to help. She entered IPA and just got all the answers. So I think you have a really great culture and climate amongst your faculty, and I really want to thank you for helping bring us, being participatory and bringing talent like Marta and her family to our schools, not just from the soccer perspective, though I do understand that is an area where she excels. So if you need help, I'm sure Marta's delighted to have me volunteering her to help with soccer, but truly, it's been an extraordinary thing to see her embrace the community so much and feel so embraced. So thank you for making it so lovely for our teachers from other countries to join us.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Ms. Armstrong.
And these might be more for you, Dr. Boozer. I'm not sure. I'll just ask, and then you guys can figure it out. Because you were talking about the campus population, how does IPA compare to other campuses in our other K-8 model that grows, especially with the K or the pre-K program? Just, I'm sure you'll give that to us eventually. If you are an English language learner and you started IPA, it is a federally mandated program, and that's why IPA exists, right? So if kiddos never come off that list, does that harm the school or the district number-wise? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So the state and the federal government definitely utilize a trajectory for where they consider English language acquisition to be and how long it should take. Research shows that academic acquisition of English takes anywhere from 5 to 9 years. So when you think about where English acquisition lies for academic pieces, that's really towards the end of our programming, right? So lots of parents and families will ask at the beginning, well, so like in second grade, my kid's gonna be bilingual, right? And I'm like, okay, so we're gonna sit down and talk. Because they're not going to be, right? It's gonna take time. And to the same extent, at the beginning, it took a lot of educating our Hispanic and Latinx families about the benefits of having Spanish language instruction and how that would impact their English acquisition, because there was even hesitancy at the beginning because they were saying, well, my kid needs to learn English, right? We're in this world where they need to have English, but what they didn't quite fully understand is that the road to English really started with Spanish for them and how we could build those two things together. So yes, there is a trajectory there. It does take time. It doesn't necessarily match what the state does for testing, though. The state is definitely looking for a quicker acceleration on access testing than what research shows should be academic language. And when you look at the access test itself, which is a super fun implementation that we do at IPA to test like 300 students, it truly measures academic language. It's not social language. So when you look at those test components, it's measuring language through science curriculum, through science content. And those students really need the time to build that capacity to achieve on that test. And that's why we see most students exiting from what you're considering, Ms. Armstrong, more so in the 4th, 5th, 6th grade range versus in the 2nd, 3rd, and kind of primary and early intermediate grades.
I just want to add, we have the benefit, and I'll say a blessing, of having the new state superintendent for the state of Illinois, who's very well versed in this. So he's looking to get some more conversations and discussion groups to talk about exactly this very topic, because where he came from in Elgin, this is powerful.
Yep.
So we'll probably be calling on you, friend.
Definitely, definitely.
So if you're looking for, so what you're saying is there isn't a different assessment for dual language, but does it exist?
As in a benchmarking assessment or a progress monitoring? You know, that's, I think lots of districts are in that reality of finding the true, valid, reliable assessment that you want to use. You know, when we're looking at IAR, when we're looking at MAP, when we're looking at those assessments, are those true bilingual dual language assessments? Not at all. You know, as Kim and Jackie were talking about, when you're trying to find that assessment practice that matches what our students need, that's a true struggle, right? And you have to create those opportunities and that authentic assessment practice. But MAP and IAR, unfortunately, are not dual language assessments. Lots of times people say, oh, well, the test is read to the kids, so that's okay, right? That helps them. But when you take, like, let's say next year, an English speaker who's done their whole day in Spanish, if they sit and take the Spanish K2 MAP test, it reads scenarios to the kids. So it's going to give them a depiction of a storyline happening that they may not have all the vocabulary for. So when it sets up the problem for them, or it sets up the background, the kiddo, it's not that they don't know how to do the math. They don't know that you just said there's 7 apples on the tree and there's 7 branches. How many apples go on each branch? Because they don't know that a rama's a branch, or what have you, right? So as soon as they don't understand that, there's a disconnect there. And that's why those assessments tend to be a little trickier. And it's also why you see those assessments tend to be more valid and more reliable as the students have been in a program longer. So that's where you're seeing that output in, you know, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade being higher than that of their K3 counterparts.
And actually, if you really stop and think about it, it's really no different for some of our students who come from low language families because in English, because it's the same thing. When your vocabulary is limited, then they may not even know what certain words are in English. So it's the same thing. So we're going to have to continue to look and utilize and figure all this out, but we use what we have, what's provided. I'm not saying that it's the best thing, but it's the same across the board, whether you're speaking Spanish or you're speaking English. If your language is limited, you're not going to be very proficient because you're going to be focusing heavily on what does this word mean.
Which is why your 90-10 makes sense, or your 80-20.
Makes a lot. And can I just say to you, thank you.
Of course.
Because that made so much sense, and I've seen this a lot of times.
But you brought the
90s. Take this compliment because I'm just teasing.
No, thank you. No.
You put it in a way, in a very simple snapshot that
Thank you.
made sense.
Yes.
I mean, because it's a lot deeper than what you were saying, but you made it so that your everyday person can understand it. So thank you.
And I think, you know, the other complexity that's out there that we didn't speak to in the slides is the enrollment of Konhubal speakers at IPA and Quiche speakers. And so those are students who are coming to us with a third language. And when you were taking those students and putting them in this 50-50 model and saying, well, you're coming to us with Konhubal, but now we're saying you need to learn Spanish and English at the same time, they don't have a first language that's a program model or a program language. And what we can see is that our Konhubal speakers tend to be some of our students that struggle the most because of what this kind of program model has done to them and what it hasn't afforded them. So now with building their Spanish foundation, we're helping them with that language of power within their own countries. And then we're also saying, let's get you that foundation. Let's get you the language base that you need. And then once we do that, we'll bring that English component in for them, which we're hoping is going to prove to be more successful for them.
Okay. And I think my only last question was when we start, because I chose IPA before it was a thing, and now it's super gone. And because I figured out the curriculum was amazing, but as kids are matriculating through, I know we talked about this pushing into the high school level with dual language AP or dual language courses. I don't know where that lives anymore.
was our first year with creating a trajectory for that. So we worked hard with Mike Lair and his team, as well as the World Language CACs, to see where dual language students would kind of matriculate into. And there was a really good conversation of they're not really a world language student in the sense of a Spanish 1, Spanish 2, Spanish 3, Spanish 4 sense, right? The way they have been taught all these years and what they have the capacity to do is very different than a world language classroom. So our students are actually going into Central and Centennial next year, and they enrolled in a heritage class that can be more uniquely designed to tailor to what they bring to the table. Our students can read a novel in Spanish. Spanish 1 and 2 and 3 students can't read the same type of novel that our kiddos can in Spanish, although of course they can read, and they can do it in Spanish, but it's just a different level. So hopefully that heritage class will then allow them to have continued exposure, continued literature exposure, continued writing exposure, continued oracy exposure, which is a component of those world language classrooms, but hopefully to a deeper level for them. And then I think we're working on some additional trajectories within there as to, what happens after freshman year. There's a variety of offerings, I think, at the high school level that haven't necessarily always run. And I think the world language departments are excited to see, now that we have this cohort of students moving forward, if we give them a heritage class, then can they go into the speaking class, or can they go into the, I forget the name of that actual class, but it's like a discussion and speaking class. And then looking in to see their junior year, can they take AP Spanish language? Their senior year, can they take AP Spanish literature? Those are courses that have run, or have, some have run, some have not run in the past. Language is one that always usually has a good cohort of students in. Literature is one that's a little trickier to find enrollment, because the books that they're reading are very much in-depth, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, all of this literature that they need to be able to read. And we're hoping that our dual language students will really be able to engage with that and provide for a course there.
That's equity in action, my friend, equity in action. Yes.
Thank you.
And it does lie with TNL.
And thank you, because as a parent, I've watched this grow, and the educators have been amazing, the administration's been amazing, but the community that you speak to, it's family. And it is different in a two-building thing. I stood in the old building, I thought, oh, I miss us as a family, but then I realized we're still there, but we're different, but it is an amazing family. So thank you.
I think Mr. Jamar Brown, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think they kind of answered it. So out of your students, how many are like native Spanish speakers in your school?
It's a very good question. It's something that's a little tricky to get actual data on, because even though you are coming from a Spanish-speaking country, you might not be a native Spanish speaker. That's where that conjugado language piece comes in, quiche comes in. And one thing that happens during the registration process is that we've gotten more welcoming to the idea of putting your true native language down. But lots of times when those families were immigrating and enrolling in school, the default was to put Spanish, because they didn't want to put conjugado, they didn't want to put quiche, they didn't want to put Quechua, all of those different languages, because there's still dominance there, right? So they would put Spanish, and that didn't give us very reliable and valid data either to say how many of our students are truly Spanish speakers, how many of them are truly conjugado speakers, and then even from the students that are listed as Spanish speakers, how many are truly Spanish speakers, or how many were raised in a house that spoke Spanish, but they're dominant English. So our fantastic kindergarten team gets to navigate that every year, because they get a class list that says, oh, this kiddo speaks Spanish, and then they look at me and they say, Jonathan, it's an English speaker. Yes, they come from a Spanish-speaking family, but they're dominant English. So they have to work hard at developing that, right? To make sure that we are educating and providing for them in the right way. But that's why the data is a little tricky and muddled when it comes to that question.
Okay, and then my second question, so IPA, when parents ask me like what school to send their kid to, I always say IPA. That's definitely on the list, mainly because of the dual language 50-50, and I said you can't go wrong there. And I have always heard about this family environment, so kudos to you all for having that out in the world, that it's a family at the school. but it was 50-50. And so now we're going to this 90-10, 80-20. What's the elevator speech that I tell parents that your kid that's an English speaker won't get lost? Because before, they might be lost half the time. Now they may be lost for 80% of the time, 90% of the time.
Yes. So we just had that elevator speech for kindergarten tours where we were informing them of that change in model and programming. And the great piece about kindergarten is that no matter what language you're in, the instructional design for early childhood matches where our kids are at with language. So kindergarten teachers use a lot of physical responses. They use a lot of gestures. They use a lot of pictures. They use a lot of vocabulary building, right? Dr. Boozer equated that language piece to even kids that come to us with low levels of English oracy that are coming from English-speaking families. We have to build that vocabulary and language for them. Kindergarten is the best environment to do that. And what they're really great at doing is building that environment and language capacity so that all kids feel success. They make it comprehensible. They really focus in on comprehensible input so that the kids understand what's happening around them. Then what they do is shelter and scaffold the output. We don't expect to see kids sitting in a dual language program that can just spew off everything in Spanish. They're going to give the kids a sentence frame. They're going to give them really strategic vocabulary to use so that they can still participate in the target language within the class, but with a lot of supports and scaffolds to do it. But that's where they work really hard to make sure everything around them is comprehensible input, meaning it's all coming in and it's all understandable by the kids. And it's really strategic, and it requires a really specific methodology when you're doing that. But that's why we look at the families and say, your kid's going to be okay. Don't worry. But your kid's going to learn to read in Spanish first. So don't sit them down next to an English reader and be like, well, they can't read all of that. No, they can't. That's okay. And what we also tell families is that their kids will learn to decode faster than any English language learner will. Or any kiddo in a monolingual English school, they will learn to decode faster than them because Spanish is transparent. It looks like it reads. It sounds like it looks. There's very few rules that you have to be able to follow. And sight words don't exist in Spanish. Like the word "the" is not a thing. Mesa, M-E-S-A. It looks just like it sounds. It's great. It's fantastic. But here's the kicker, is that kids can decode things, but then they can't comprehend them. So we have to build the comprehension ability for kids, which is why our targeted learning focus is where it's at. Because you'll sit with a kiddo, they can decode the whole entire book, and you ask them what they read, and they're like, I don't know. So that's where we have to build that capacity to make sure that they're understanding what they're reading and not just decoding it.
So in essence, Mr. Brown, you can say from switching from a 50-50 to a 90-10, less confusing for the child.
And it is true, the first year as English speakers, you can feel defeated or deflated as a parent because you're frustrated for your child, but then you start to see this growth. They promised me it would happen, and it did. And I knew it was legit when they started speaking in their sleep in Spanish. It was so strange. So it works. You just, as an English speaker, you kind of have to trust the process, right?
And it's hard, right? It takes a lot of trust. It does. And Ms. Kinney just reminded me of our little slogan. When we're doing these tours, we always tell families, you let us handle the second language, you work on the first language. So if you are an English speaker, your job at home is to work on English with your kiddo. You build that capacity, because if they don't have a strong foundation in their first language, adding the second language is going to be all the more difficult. So if Ms. Armstrong is thinking about students at IPA, we would look at her and say, your job is to work on English with them at home. You let us handle the Spanish, and vice versa. If you have a Spanish speaker, you work on Spanish at home, you let us do the English. And that's because we want the language model provided for the kiddos to be accurate. We don't want families to have to feel that they have the pressure when they're not, fluent and capable in that language. And that's where you get those errors, those confusions, those misteachings. So parents can definitely support. I told them when they bring home the words, you're going to see the word and you're like, yeah, that says Mesa. Okay, great. And they're going to be able to do all that work, but always focusing on what language they speak at home and allowing us to build the partner language is the most important.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you all for your time. It is, for the extra time. I think that it's a building that we continue to hear reports from, and each time it's different, but in a really good way. That chart that you had with that exponential growth, I think explains so much more, and a reason why we've been contemplating and thinking about, right, do we do a 6-8? And so that chart, I think, is amazing, and you spoke my language with effect size. So keep it up. Keep up the really good work. Thank you all for being here. And I think there is one question: how do we support you? We have been asking that to all the campuses. Is there anything that you can give us now? Just send it to us if you also don't have anything. Sounds like you got it.